Hi, Lauren. Ooh. Hey, Lauren, did you want to practice sharing your screen just to check that that's working? Can you hear me okay, Lauren? Hi, Kate. Lauren, do you want to turn your mic off just to let me know that you can hear us okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Did you want to have a go at sharing your screen just to make sure that's working?
Yeah, let's see how we go.
Fantastic. Yep, I can see that just fine. Kate and Brooke, can you see that all right? Fabulous. Okay, so we'll give people just a couple more minutes, but then we'll get started at, Yeah, we'll get started at 1 o'clock. And now I'm probably a new face to you guys. I'll do a formal introduction, but for everyone who's here, hi, I'm Stephanie. You'll be getting emails from me because I'm going to be taking over, picking up where Susie left off. So, but Robin will be in a little bit to kick us off. We'll give him a couple of minutes.
No worries.
The goal.
We've got 4 so far.
Excellent. Lauren's all set to go?
Yes, and we've practiced the screen sharing, so the technology is in our favour today.
Thanks, Lauren, for coming on board today.
No worries.
Hi, Katrina. Someone chatting to us?
Oh, no, that's just one comment from Kate, just to check sound quality.
Excellent. So you're...
I'll leave that open, actually. Yeah, so we're all ready to go, just waiting for a bit of an audience.
Can you download the metrics after the fact?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because everyone registered to be.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
so
How many did you have registered?
According to the calendar request, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Awesome.
13. But that includes us.
Okay.
Yeah. Although the world is a very unstable place right now, and anything could have happened since agreeing to that.
I think school's out yesterday, wasn't it?
Oh, it's very soon. Private schools may have closed. Yeah, I think public schools close on the 11th. Yeah, so we have a few.
Good. Excellent. Let me know. Then I'm going to sit in.
Well, do we want to get started? I know we've only got 45 minutes of
Yes.
time.
Oh, everyone's coming in.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday and happy end of the year to everybody. This is our December education session. I'm very excited today to introduce our new team member, Stephanie Champion. And Dr. Champion, you're just going to love. She's going to be here with us for 2 years. And one of her jobs is to run the most awesome lunchtime education sessions for you guys. And so it's going to be a regular thing from February to November every year. So the new program will be sent out to you in the new year because we want you to get excited. And we've got a whole lot of really exciting and interesting innovations to add into the program. So Stephanie, I'll hand over to you Stephanie is going to chair today and introduce our speaker. And also, Stephanie, just tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know you've got all sorts of interesting activities and skills that will be of interest to our cardiac rehab clinicians. So over to you.
Thank you, Robin. So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for sparing some time for us. I think that this education session, we want this to be useful and interesting for you guys. So we'll be continuing the program next year. If you do have any suggestions or things you might like to cover, please feel free to send me an email. I will send out an email just introducing myself to everyone so that you have got a contact with me. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I have, my background is actually in childhood obesity, but that does translate quite well to adult obesity, and that sort of led me down a path of physical activity, monitoring and using devices to see people's physical activity levels. And then I moved into adult physical activity and then cardiovascular disease. So it's been a process, but throughout the whole way, I have been picking up skills, and I do want this education program to be really interesting for you guys. So we're thinking quizzes and prizes and videos, and yeah, watch this space. It's going to be fun. So just to introduce our speaker for today, so we're hearing from Lauren Stribley, who has been roped in to give the last presentation of the year. Now, Lauren is a clinical rehab CAT dietitian from the Integrated Cardiovascular Clinical Network of South Australia, and she's going to talk to us about food and diet, and I think we sort of had a working title of Food for Thought for today's session. So I'll hand you over to Lauren. Thank you. And then afterwards, we'll come back and do some questions. We can run this as a bit of a casual type thing. If you have anything you want to make sure it is covered or ask any questions, feel free to put stuff in the chat, and we'll keep this going as a really interactive session. So I'll hand over to you now, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph and Robin. I'm just going to share my screen and see how we go. Exactly like what you said, Steph, I'm really happy for it just to be a casual sort of session. It's December, it's a Wednesday, we're halfway through the week.
And we're all sort of already thinking about the Christmas food, so.
For people to drop any questions, which is why for
well, we're losing you a little bit with the.
Ask everyone to turn their mic.
If everyone can turn their mics off, we might be getting a little bit of reverb.
I would take a bit of a different spin on it. I'll keep going, but put anything in the chat box if all of a sudden my internet. Today, I thought rather than speaking about what foods we should be eating in terms of cardiac rehab, I thought a different way of approaching it would be more so looking at the hows and the whys that ourselves or the patients that we work with, what it is that they're sort of doing with their food. And I thought particularly too, what I see often with cardiac rehab patients that I work with, often from their event or what they've been through, sometimes they can be quite restrictive with what they're eating. They might have been quite scared and they've made a lot of sudden changes. So it's trying to find something that's sustainable and not necessarily based on fear and restriction. Also too, like coming into this time of year with Christmas and New Year's resolutions, often we find people looking for quick fixes, different diets that they're trying to stick to. We've also found too with COVID, lots of people have sort of come out of lockdown, and perhaps their relationship with food and relationship with their body has perhaps been a little bit dented. So we've also found a lot of people coming out of lockdown and now starting to find the sort of looking for quick, easy fixes in terms of diets, when we know that really restrictive diets aren't sustainable long term, and we're wanting to try and find something sustainable for the patients that we're working with. Another way that I also find this sort of approach with eating works is often we will get those sort of cardiac rehab patients that say, like, I know everything, I know what I should be doing, everything I've tried's already worked. So rather than talking about what it is they should be eating, instead we can take a different look at it and look at the how and the why as another sort of toolbox, or another tool in our toolbox to help our patients find that sustainable sort of eating pattern. And so what I tend to think of is what we're trying to avoid is this sort of diet sort of cycle, which we know there's a lot of research showing that diets and restrictive eating is more likely to lead to binges later on. And what we really want to try and do is break this sort of cycle where people restrict themselves, they feel deprived, they eat to fuel their emotional eating. They feel better for a short period of time, but then often their eating is associated with all the dieting that can happen. And so one way I find of approaching it is often with cardiac rehab clients that I speak with. Not only will we talk about the appropriate foods that they should be eating for their heart health, but also to the how and the why of what they eat. And so often, as a way we would refer to this would be as mindful sort of eating. So whenever they are eating, being present in the moment, aware of the food and their eating experience without judgment, and using all of their senses. So when we say using all of our senses, that's using sight, touch, taste, smell, so that it's a really mindful eating experience. Particularly too, but without judgment, that's often when we're in social settings, things will be thrown around about saying, well, don't eat that, that's bad, don't eat this, you shouldn't be eating that. And even myself, as having a dad that's had a heart attack and gone through cardiac rehab, last Christmas he had received a lot of judgment from family members saying you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't eat that, when really just let the guy enjoy his Christmas. So I think that's something good to be mindful of when we are in an eating environment and eating with friends and family, not passing on judgment to other people. And particularly too, the more that we can talk about this with our patients, the more that they can be aware of it when they're in these sort of eating experiences. So when I talk about mindful eating with my rehab clients, I often get them to pay close attention to their body. So in terms of hunger signals, are you feeling physically hungry? Is it psychological hunger? Also too, keeping in mind their habits and their triggers. So a common one I often see with some of the cardiac rehab patients I work with is that they'll often restrict their eating or undereat a lot throughout the day, but then they come home from work or they sit down on the couch in the evening, and then they mindlessly eat and overeat on the couch. Often then they feel guilty, and then they're eating more. So that would be a classic situation of being mindful of the habits and the triggers. And if we can help them to eat adequately throughout the day, then they'd be less likely to overeat in the evening. Particularly this time of year, often people will say, I'm sort of quitting sugar, I'm not having mince pies, I'm not going to enjoy any of the Christmas pudding, those sorts of things. And I think it's really important to remind our patients that they can still enjoy these foods. They don't need to cut them out completely. Every food has a time and a place, and at Christmas time, it is okay to enjoy these foods. Obviously, within moderation. We're not wanting to have 6 or 7 Christmas puddings, but obviously to enjoy some Christmas food at Christmas time with friends and family is more than okay. Because often we find people that say, I'm going to quit sugar or quit whatever food it might be. They might be able to do it for a short period of time, but more than likely, they'll find that restriction will then lead to a binge later on. Often too, people tend to put labels on food. So they'll think of food as good food or bad food, when at the end of the day, food is food, and we don't want to be putting labels on the food. Often we tend to think if we eat a good food, we must be a good person, and if we've consumed a bad food, that we're a bad person. And then naturally, when we're having this sort of self-talk, that's when bad food, we then feel bad and then more likely to eat more of it through guilt. So approaching particularly like the festive season, or even just as a cardiac rehab patient, just in a social setting, knowing that food is food, there's no good, there's no bad, but obviously we do want to try and have more of the cardiac friendly foods more often and less of those sort of processed and packaged foods less often. So I tend to think, particularly nowadays, if people are saying what's a bad food, unless you've got an allergy to it, unless it's got COVID on it, there's no reason to have to eliminate it 100% in terms of being sustainable. And keeping in mind too, I think we want to keep in mind that eating every time is an opportunity to nourish our body. So in terms of getting those good foods in terms of like our healthy fats and our fibers, lean proteins, those sorts of foods. But often too, we also want to nourish our mind as well. And so sometimes there are foods that have a time and a place. And people might enjoy a glass of alcohol on a weekend with friends and family. And yes, it might not be a healthy choice, but it's more nourishment for the mind and something to enjoy. And particularly sometimes I find in cardiac rehab, it's more often for clients or patients trying to get more of the good foods in rather than having to eliminate things from their diet. So sort of using it as an opportunity for nourishment rather than depriving themselves instead. And I suppose because when it comes to eating, we want to keep in mind that there are lots of different things in someone's food choices. Naturally, we have dietary preferences. So someone might be vegetarian, they might be vegan, they might be eliminating certain foods just out of religious or cultural reasons. Naturally too, our food choices can be driven by our thoughts and our emotions. So if we're having a bad day, we might be looking for something sweet or something tasty to make us feel better. We also want to be aware of our appetite. So are we feeling hungry? Are we feeling full? Do I need a big meal, or do I perhaps just need a smaller snack? Not just keeping in mind the foods for what they are, but also savouring the foods, the taste, the texture, things that can really satisfy us in terms of all of our senses. We also want to take into account someone's nutrition knowledge, and for some people, their nutrition knowledge might be strong, for others, it might be weak. And that's where, in terms of cardiac rehab, we can teach
Oh, Lauren, I think we've lost you a little bit there. Can you still hear us? Okay. Oh, I think we've lost Lauren.
Oh, sorry, she might come back in.
Yeah, we'll give her a minute. She might come back. In the meantime, did anyone want to have a chat about what we've heard so far?
I thought it was really brilliant, like as far as pitching everything towards Christmas Day and the next few weeks. I think it's great advice, and as patients are coming in to the services to see, you can actually have the Christmas Day conversation. I remember when we were doing our telemonitoring in heart failure, we got really over the top about what to advise patients about Christmas Day with heart failure. And I think it was Carmen De Pasquale said, just tell them to have a great day.
Yep.
And that was the best. So
you can overthink something.
You can overthink things.
Okay, so we have Lauren back now.
She's on mute.
Sorry about that.
So do you want to pick up where you left off for the nutritional knowledge? I think that was an important point you're making there.
Perfectly fine. And I caught the end of what Robin said just then and 100% agree. I think sometimes people make it more complicated than what it really needs to be. Just really need to keep things simple.
Your talk today, Lauren, and the advice from Carmen was, just like, oh gosh, he's right. Just calm you down and go, yeah. And when we told patients that, it had the same effect on them. They go, oh, okay, all right. And I don't think, as you were saying, good or bad, I don't think they were bad. They just were able to relax because the nurse said, relax, enjoy your day. Yeah. Thank you. Good advice.
So yes, with the nutrition knowledge, that's where as a cardiac rehab practitioner, we can give our clients or our patients the information about the sorts of foods they could be including more often to optimize their cholesterol levels, their sugar levels, their blood pressure, the weight. But that's where they can make an informed decision how they might include that in their diet. And keeping in mind that how I might eat versus how someone else might eat, everyone's very different. So there's by no means one way of eating which is exclusively correct. And then when we think about natural eating habits, keeping in mind that some people like to graze, some people like to have 3 meals a day, some people have always skipped breakfast and survive okay. So everyone has their different way of eating. So there's no one way that's exactly exclusive when it comes to the right way of eating. And one thing that I quite often discuss with cardiac rehab patients is the difference between the physical hunger and the psychological hunger. So keeping in mind, physical hunger would be those times when we get that signal from our body. So perhaps hunger pains, we start to feel a bit peckish or lightheaded. It's been a couple of hours since we've eaten, and we now know that it's time to refuel our body ready for the next period of time. In comparison, then there's like a psychological hunger. So we're perhaps not necessarily physically hungry, but it's more so driven by a psychological need. So often it can be stress. So whether that's stress related to their health, to their family, financial stress, stress from the lockdowns and COVID and the different restrictions. Sometimes we find people particularly can boredom eat. Particularly I find in cardiac rehab, if they were someone that would normally be quite active and on the go, and that they're needing to stay at home and rest a bit more. They can find themselves eating related to stress or boredom, or sometimes too it can be procrastination as well. And more often than not, I would say for most client or patients, particularly those that might have weight concerns, most of their extra calories in their diet will come from that psychological eating. The reason from the stress, boredom, procrastination, all those other reasons that we might eat beyond our physical hunger. And that's where perhaps we need to address more of their lifestyle factors and their sort of mental health and their psychological sort of strategies to work through these things rather than the food. And often too, when we're emotionally eating or psychologically eating, we're not exactly looking for an apple. That's when we're looking for those sweet, salty, oily sorts of foods that we know that are going to make us feel good. And often I find people then have those foods and then they feel guilty and then they go back for more and they blame that food. They'll say the chocolate's the problem. But really what we want to try and do is take a step back and like, what is it that's leading to the chocolate? Is it the stress? Are they bored? Are they procrastinating? What else is happening for them leading to that food? So what I've got here is just a table that breaks down the sort of the difference between physical hunger and keeping in mind that, yeah, normally we'd want to be eating about 3 to 4 meals or 3 main meals a day with snacks in between. So physical hunger would gradually come on in between those meals, whereas psychological hunger would tend to come on quite quickly and often triggered by some sort of emotional sort of event. And like we said, if it's a physical hunger, that's where something like a piece of fruit will fill the hole. Whereas if we're emotionally eating, that's when we find a piece of fruit wouldn't do the job. We want something that's going to make us feel good, like a piece of chocolate, for example. We also tend to find too, with psychological eating, it's quite urgent, we're hungry, we're stressed, we just want to eat it straight away. And we tend to be quite impulsive, we'll eat it quite quickly and then feel quite guilty afterwards. So it's these sorts of signs that I look out for with cardiac rehab patients when I'm talking to them, and also just sort of seeing finding different strategies to work through what might be triggering these other reasons other than physical hunger that they might be eating for. Another way with eating that I talk about with my patients is considering their hunger level. So I think of it on a scale of 1 to 10. Keeping in mind that 1 is super, super hungry, you're starving, you feel like you're about to pass out, that you're so hungry. And 10 is Christmas Day, when we've eaten too much, we need to undo the button on our pants, we're just feeling bloated, uncomfortable, and ready to have a nap. And we know that being physically full and uncomfortable is not a pleasant experience. And neither is being starving and feeling lightheaded and having hunger pains. What we want to try and do is stay in this sort of ideal green zone between the 3 to 6 out of 10, where we feel content, we're not starving hungry, but we're not feeling super full, we're just sort of satisfied. And I often tend to think of it like the petrol light on our car, that we know that we don't want the petrol light to get to just below 0, because that's when it's getting dangerous. We might get caught somewhere far away from a petrol station. Whereas about 2 to 3 is when the petrol light comes on in the car and you start to think, where's the next petrol station? Do I have my wallet on me? How much further do I need to drive? And so in terms of food, that's when we want the patients to start thinking of the beginning of these physical signs where they might feel a little bit peckish, and then they can start planning. How far away is it to the next meal? What foods do I have available to me? Do I need to organize something? And go from there. And then eating to the point where we feel satisfied, but not to the point that we're starting to feel sick, which is really important. So sometimes people will keep a bit of a food diary, but not necessarily what they're eating, but more so a rating out of 10 in terms of their hunger level. So when it gets to the breakfast, am I 1 out of 10, starving hungry, and perhaps need quite a large meal to satisfy me? Or am I already a 5 out of 10 and perhaps don't need that much food to help to satisfy me? And so one way that I also think about mindful eating, I'm going to turn on my video so you can see. What we want to try and do is, I think when we're eating, we want to think of ourselves a little bit like a MasterChef judge. So at the end, when they're judging the food, they'll pick it up on the fork or on the spoon, and they might not necessarily eat it straight away. So they might play with the food in their hands. They might smell the food to get the smell satisfaction. They'll look at the food to get the visual satisfaction. And then they'll put the food on their tongue and let it tickle their taste buds and eat it nice and slowly. Sometimes the patients will laugh at me and tell me that's going to take forever, and I'm not expecting them to eat. They don't have to be a MasterChef judge every time they eat, but the slower we can eat, the more senses that we can satisfy, the better. And we want it to take about 15 to 20 minutes for a meal for the signal to get from our stomach to our brain to say, yes, we're feeling full. So for today, I've got a licorice all sort with me that I could find in the pantry. So if you've got any food nearby, feel free to use it. So what we want to think of, you can do this with any sort of food. I prefer to do it with sweets because it's more fun. So first of all, we want to feel the food. So I can feel that it's solid cube. I can see the food. I can see that it's nice and colorful. I can smell that it smells nice and sweet. And then what we can do is, we don't necessarily need to eat the whole licorice all sort all at once. We can just take small bits. So often with clients or patients, I'd encourage them to sort of nibble like a rabbit. You don't have to put it all in your mouth all at once. We can eat it nice and slowly. And it's not going to take me 15, 20 minutes to eat a licorice all sort, but definitely the slower we can do it, that's going to reduce the amount that I might need to feel satisfied. So I've taken off a little bit. Can take a small mouthful. Let it tickle all your taste buds. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to swallow it. But that's where, yeah, the slower we eat things, small bites, that's going to take me a long time to get through the licorice all sort if I take it bit by bit and let it tickle all my taste buds on the way down. So yeah, definitely a good activity to play with your patients, because I'm finding something that's got different textures. So sometimes I might do like Lindt chocolates that have the sort of flavoring on the inside. So you get the hard chocolate on the outside and the goo on the inside, because it's fun, it's something to play with, and it's a good little experiment. So yeah, that's a good trick to play with our patients. And so yeah, thinking of the hunger scale, like we said, from most hungry to most full, and keeping in mind, we don't want to be starving hungry. We don't want to be feeling like we're going to explode. We just want to be in the middle where we're sort of content. So when I'm talking with patients, different ways that I kind of help them to sort of about their mindful eating or their mindless eating is sort of thinking, am I hungry right now? Am I full? Am I stressed? Am I bored? Am I tired? And how is this going to make me feel in 5 to 10 minutes? Is it that I'm going to be feeling full and satisfied? Or is this food just going to fill me up for 5 to 10 minutes and then I'm going to want more? We want to make sure that we've had somewhat regularity in our day. So having those roughly 3 meals a day and if needed, some snacks in between. Because we do know skipping meals is more likely to lead to mindless eating. We also want to make sure that we've eaten adequately in terms of portions throughout the day, because often I find if we're under eating throughout the day, that's when we're more likely to mindlessly eat later in the day. It's also good to make sure that our patients are getting adequate fluids in throughout the day. Often I find a lot of people that struggle with mindless eating, they're not very good at getting their water intake in, and keeping in mind getting adequate fluids throughout the day is going to help with feeling satisfied. Like I said earlier, being mindful of the pace that we eat at, we're wanting to allow about 15 to 20 minutes for a meal for that signal to get to our brain to say, yes, I'm feeling full. And particularly in today's sort of modern lifestyle, I find a lot of people are quite fast eaters. They'll demolish a meal in 5-10 minutes and then still be feeling hungry later on and be looking for second serves or nibbles or snacks later on. And also too, to try and avoid distractions whilst we're eating. So that's when people might be at the computer whilst they eat lunch. They could be in front of the TV at dinner time, and if they're distracted whilst they're eating, they're not necessarily aware of what they're putting in their mouth. Often too, we find if people eat whilst they're on the go, so they might be doing errands around the house and they just sort of nibble at the pantry and come back, they're not necessarily aware of what they've eaten because their mind's been thinking about the other sorts of things that they've been doing whilst they're walking around. So when we put this sort of in like a Christmas context, I sort of encourage my patients to sort of think ahead and sort of plan, because otherwise we find without the planning, that's when we tend to find that there's an excess amount of leftovers that they then feel obliged to then need to eat. Whereas if they can be sensible and plan ahead, they can still have a variety of different enjoyable fun foods at Christmas, but just without that excess amount of leftovers that they'll be eating mince pies for the next 6 months of the year. Also good, particularly if there's places where they're going where they might take a platter or take some food along, a really good opportunity to take perhaps a healthier option. So perhaps if it's like a platter or something like that, they can include some veggie sticks. They could include some nuts, a bit of dried fruit, some grainy crackers to go with the cheese. So there's definitely ways of making healthier options. At Christmas, I think it's really important too that we're mindful that we're sitting down whilst we're eating. So that way we're a lot more aware of what we're consuming. And when we eat, to sort of put down the knife and fork and finish off the mouthful that's in our mouth. Because often we find at Christmas, we're surrounded by all these delicious foods and we want to eat them really quickly. But really, we just want to sort of slow down and enjoy the food. And that's where too, having conversation with friends and family that whilst we're eating, that's also going to help to slow it down as well. Another thing I find around the festive season is people will often skip meals to sort of make room for their Christmas dinner or their Christmas lunch or their Christmas function that they might have. But that's when we tend to find by people skipping meals, then they're more hungry when they get to that Christmas function and then more likely to overeat. So sometimes people sort of say, oh, I need to skip breakfast and lunch today to make room or to earn my dinner tonight. And that's not necessarily the case. You can still have a healthy breakfast, a healthy lunch, and feel satisfied and still enjoy yourself at that Christmas function that night. And often people will feel that they can't have their favorite Christmas food, but knowing they can still have it, they can enjoy it in moderation, because yeah, it's Christmas time. It's Christmas time to enjoy Christmas foods, so it's okay. We just don't want to do it in excess. And that's where, yeah, if people feel like they can't have it, they're more likely to overdo it. So it's a lot better if they just keep it in moderation. I'm not sure if everyone's seen this, but the Heart Foundation last week also released a cookbook or some recipes for the holiday season. So I can send down around the PDF to Steph, if you like, for anyone that hasn't seen it. But I think it was about 90 odd pages of different recipes for the festive season. And they were all they looked really yummy, and all sort of healthier versions of different mains, sides and sweets, which could be useful at Christmas, but also to just throughout the year in general. So that was a really good resource that they put out, I thought. And if this is something that you think's of interest or something you'd like to do some more reading in, I've listed here a couple of different websites and a few different books on sort of mindful eating and different ways of sort of approaching like a relationship with food for our cardiac rehab patients. So if anyone that's a reader, these could be some good places to go for more information. And there's also some phone apps as well. So Headspace, Stop, Breathe, Think, and Smiling Mind, which have some mindful eating scripts with them. So that brings me to the end. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lauren. I think honestly I could incorporate a lot of that advice into my approach to Christmas eating. Did anyone want to pose any questions of Lauren? Anyone want to jump in first? Because if not, I'll start off the questions. Just one thing I thought was really interesting, Lauren, I think food is a very individual choice, and so it makes sense for people to be thinking about what's best for me and making a plan for themselves. But is there a role to be bringing family members into this, like getting them on board to say, can you support me by not offering drink after drink after drink, or is this something that really individuals want to be taking control of?
Yeah, I think it's good to have the family involved and aware, because you're right, like if people are pestering you to have a drink or to have a bit of cake or something like that, naturally after a while the individual gets sick of saying no and just says yes and has it. So yeah, I think that's a conversation for the patient to have with their friends and family and say, like, yeah, please don't pester me, I'm trying to make some better choices. Yeah, because otherwise it is really difficult for those people that don't have that support network around them. And perhaps, yeah,
you don't want to feel like the party pooper, always saying no, always making other people feel bad for saying yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a really common struggle that people will often report to have, which I think that just comes down to that relationship that you have with your friends or your family. But yeah, they should trust you for your judgment, and if you don't want it, well, you don't want it, so leave me alone.
Any other questions from the group? We do have a couple more minutes.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Frank here, Cardiac Rehab Coordinator from Mount Gambier. Excellent presentation, Lauren. Very impressive approach in looking at the psychological and the mental health approach. I suppose in my many years of cardiac rehab, I really enjoyed sitting in on the dietitian sessions, the group sessions, and listening to the information and knowledge that they pass on to their clients. My little bit of issue may be just how do we tease out this psychological information out of these clients when most of the time it's a group setting that these individuals find themselves in. Very hard to get those one-to-one assessments with dietitians in regional areas.
No, very good question. And you're right. Sometimes to have these discussions in a group environment can be quite difficult, particularly for whatever reason that's triggering their psychological eating. It's often, a personal concern and not something they want to be sharing with a group of strangers. That's where perhaps, it could be perhaps discussing as part of the dietitian's nutrition content of the cardiac rehab program, just be acknowledging it as a sort of a group concern. The emotional eating side of things. And I think too, like every individual has had their own experience of emotional eating from different degrees. And that's where it could even be the dietitian sharing their experience, or even just a basic example of how someone might feel and what emotional eating might be. And then that way, perhaps when patients then might follow up with a conversation after the session or a conversation with the nurse afterwards or something like that to sort of seek out further help. Because I think, it's a very important thing to acknowledge, given that going through cardiac rehab can be quite an emotional roller coaster, and naturally that is going to have some sort of impact on your food. But then it's also tricky when you've then got a dietitian saying, eat this, don't eat that. It can be quite conflicting.
Absolutely.
No, good question.
It might be something that the social worker as well could maybe tap into. I really, really loved your healthy option for Christmas and your healthy platters. I suppose that'll be measured whether you're invited the following year.
Oh, you don't want to invite back a person who brought carrots.
Yeah, don't ask Frank. He's too healthy.
You might have to have a backup tray in the booth. And the phone apps, excellent. I was just... Sorry?
I was going to say,
sorry, Lauren.
the doesn't need to be all the healthy foods, but it can be just a greater proportion.
Absolutely. And the phone apps, I thought that was an excellent addition and something we all need to tap into, and I'll certainly speak to our dietitians here about that.
Yeah, because often people will do them if they do struggle with sort of emotional eating. Some of my patients will they'll play with the app before they eat, or some of the apps will have like positive affirmations and those sorts of things just before they go into that eating experience, just to calm them down, because otherwise they just run into the eating and eat the meal and then it's gone.
And Lauren, do you plan to tap into the regional dietitian workforce at all in your time there?
It's definitely, I think it's something within the dietitian world, it's becoming more and more of a discussion that we would have with our patients. So I'm sure it would be something, it wouldn't exactly be new to the dietitians in the regional areas. It might just be perhaps with their resourcing, there just might be other priorities that they need to address first before they get onto the emotional side of things.
Absolutely.
But it's definitely, I think they do have resources available for them with this sort of information. It's becoming more of a conversation that we'll have. But definitely happy to reach out to any of the regional dietitians. But I feel like, they'd be aware of it in some form or another.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lauren. We are almost out of time, so we just have one more question from the room.
Frank and Lauren, just want to join in the conversation. Do you think telehealth will help one-to-one consults with dietitians for rural patients? Is that already happening now that telehealth is going to become more permanent? Can a GP or a cardiac rehab nurse set up a one-to-one consult through the chronic disease plan or something like that for telehealth? Do you know anything that's happening, Lauren, in your side of the woods?
Yeah, so you're right. The care plans with telehealth becoming more of a permanent fixture. And even I find just within what I do at the Catch program, even though I might only have one phone call with the patient, it's still an hour phone call. And normally I'll get some, or I'll have access to the notes. So at least I kind of have a bit of a heads up as to whether or not someone might be experiencing some sort of stress or how their mental health is before their dietitian phone call. So I'm quite fortunate in that regard, that normally their conversation with the nurse has already perhaps brought up some of those concerns that they might have. But yeah, definitely something that we can do more of. And I have been doing a lot more telehealth dietitian consults, and the beauty of it being that you can have that one-on-one conversation, and perhaps have more than one conversation. We might have a couple of appointments to sort of flesh it out a little bit more, but then also have that support of their nurse or their GP to sort of help them out as well locally.
All right. Okay, so we might draw the session to a close there. Thank you so much, Lauren, for your very interesting and timely presentation. Just to sign off, a couple of things. We will be having sessions again next year, so watch this space. I'll send out an email to let you guys all know what's happening. I will send out a follow-up email with that gorgeous resource that Lauren has mentioned, the Heart Foundation recipe link, and we'll stick all of the artifacts from this session onto the website so you guys can listen to the recording again if there's anything you want to hear, and or if you want to refer anyone else to the presentation. So thank you very much, guys.
Merry Christmas.
And you know, we got to the end of 2020 and I've sort of snuck in at the finish line to meet you guys. And yeah, we'll be touching base with you in the new year with a fascinating new program. So we hope to see you back with us then. So thanks everyone. Thanks. Bye.
You.
Bye, thanks.
Happy Christmas, Linda.
Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas, Frank. Stay.
Bye-bye.
Stick to those healthy platters.
Thank you.
There we go. Oh wait, cancel that. I just want to shut off the recording.